It's Groundhog's Day in Toronto. The Raptors lose to another good team. This time it was the Minnesota Timberwolves. Let's go to the film room.
The only thing that's originally filmed is that and I've studied older films and tried to figure out how I got that impression. I was getting these right in the cutting room.
The unique thing about film is an art form
exactly.
is the editing.
All right, so a lot of the Raptors' actions will rely on this guy offensively, Jakob Poeltl. He is very important for the screen-reliant offense. And so as we flow through a couple of off-ball actions, they now flow into a pick-and-roll between Jakob and IQ. And because Rudy Gobert is setting in a drop, IQ is going to knock down this pull-up three. A little bit later, now Scotty Barnes gets a pin-down screen from Jakob Poeltl. And then they immediately flow into an empty side pick and roll. He puts pressure on the basket by getting baseline. That creates a wide open opportunity for Jakob Poeltl to finish at the hoop. But this is sort of a different version that I'm not quite a fan of. And this is, 1-5 flat, if you will, between Brandon Ingram and Jakob Poeltl, where they have guys spaced out so BI and Yak can operate, right? This is basically like, hey, let's get something good. Shot clock is winding down. But Jakob doesn't connect on this screen, and BI doesn't wait for the rescreen. He just goes. And so he's now engaging the help defense of Rudy Gobert. He doesn't necessarily make this read, though, that can maybe potentially force Dante DiVincenzo to help. And so boom, gets blocked here by Rudy Gobert. Tough shot. And as things start to devolve for the Raptors, it ends up being isolation basketball for their two stars. This time, Scotty Barnes gets Rudy Gobert on a switch, isn't able to score on him. And Rudy has been a good switch big this season. Then, a pin down for Brandon Ingram. Similar action as we saw earlier with Scotty Barnes, but a little bit more ball holding from Ingram here. But regardless, the Raptors will live and die by these mid-range jump shots, and BI, for the most part this season, has been able to capitalize, but this is sort of their offense. It's living on these tough shots. As we see a little bit later, similar option screen action for Brandon Ingram. He can pop out here, he can pop out this way, and that just creates a lot of different options for the defense to read. And exactly what happens, BI pops out. Same thing as that Scotty Barnes action. They flow into a pick and roll. He pumps, but Jaden McDaniels stays on him. Just misses this mid-range jump shot. Tough look. It's going to be, Brandon Ingram, Jakob Poeltl, pick and roll. And because Rudy Gobert is so good at the basket, and by the way, guys, the Timberwolves are a very good defense. This is nothing to scoff at, but it just goes to show you how hard it is to score against good teams. When that mid-range shot isn't going, BI is going to try to take it to the hoop, and he can't do that against Rudy Gobert. And so as things continue to devolve for the stars of this Raptors team, you have to look to the supporting cast to try and alleviate some pressure. And while Jacoby Walter is looking for Brandon Ingram here on the post-up, honestly, he probably should hit him because he has Ayo Dosunmu on him here. This is an opportunity that he should take advantage of. Instead, he decides to take it to the basket himself and doesn't have the shot creation ability to create that floater for himself. And that is what the Raptors offense boils down to, folks. As we welcome you into the film room, ladies and gentlemen, the Raptors lose another game to a close, or to a good team, excuse me. This time the Minnesota Timberwolves, 115 to 107. Now, I thought the Raptors played a pretty decent game in the first half. Outside of their bench. Their bench was truly abhorrent in this one. Jamal Shed played 17 minutes. He was minus 19 in those 17 minutes. Perhaps one of the worst basketball games that I've seen him play. Sandro Mamukelashvili, he did pitch in for 11 points. He did score the ball, but truthfully, his defensive effort was lackadaisical, and he was minus 8 in this game. Jacoby Walter had 2 points in this game. Both of them came from the free throw line, 0 of 2 from the field in 17 minutes, minus 4 in this game. That is their, kind of core trio off of the bench with Colin Murray-Boyles not healthy. And those three guys were really bad. They were really ineffective for this Raptors team. It's also worth noting that Brandon Ingram and Jakob Poeltl were also minus 27 and minus 23 respectively in this game. Now, does that tell the full story? I don't necessarily think so. I think the Raptors starters overall, when they played together, were actually relatively good. And you saw it in some of those possessions that I highlighted. They can get to a functional offense relatively. Can they do it when good teams rev up their defense? They haven't been able to. I mean, like, I think ultimately the big question moving forward for this Raptors team is not even a question. It's more of a statement in the sense that they are who they are. And how much more can we rely on any sort of data we gain over the next 6 weeks that tells us otherwise? I don't think we can. There's a decent sample size here for us to see that the Raptors, as currently stand, are good but not great. And they probably aren't going to make any sort of playoff run. Now, I'm open to them shocking me. And it doesn't seem like they're in a state where this current team, as constructed, can take that leap into championship or contention level, or even, surefire playoff team level. This Raptors team is now, I will say, I'll kind of dive into this a little bit more. They are at risk of losing their playoff spot. They're 1.5 games ahead of the Philadelphia 76ers, but they are 2.5 games ahead of the Orlando Magic and the Miami Heat, who are in that play-in spot. The Sixers have been struggling immensely recently because no Joel Embiid. He's out with I believe a rib injury or something along the lines of that. Paul George is obviously suspended. And if you go and look at their on-off numbers with those guys out of the lineup, they are not a good basketball team. All bless Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, who are incredibly fun to watch. They're not that good of a basketball team because the rest of their roster leaves a lot to be desired. So I actually think the Sixers are going to fall into the play-in spot, and one of the Orlando Magic or Miami Heat or Charlotte Hornets will jump into that 6 seed. We'll see if they jump into the 5 seed, depending on how the Raptors do. Now, I will say, looking ahead at their schedule, the Raptors have only 6 games remaining against what I would classify as good teams. And by good teams, I mean teams that they will not beat because they have proven they cannot beat these type of teams, which means the top 10 teams in the NBA. They are now 4-17 against the top 10 teams in the NBA. They have lost 15 of their last 16 games against those type of teams. They're not going to win those 6 games. They play the Nuggets soon. They play the Pistons 2 more times. They play the Celtics. And I can't remember who was the other team that I mentioned. Oh, they play the Knicks 1 more time as well. I do not believe that they are going to beat those teams. I am very open to being shocked, but again, the data proves that they are not going to beat those teams. The rest of their schedule is relatively easy. They play a couple of tanking teams, which they should be able to take care of. We'll see how they take care of the Mavericks on Sunday. At the same time, they also have, questionable games against the Phoenix Suns, who are battling for a play-in spot, and the Orlando Magic, who are battling for a play-in spot, and the LA Clippers, who are battling for a play-in spot. So teams that have a reason to play and play competitively in games. So not to say that their schedule is easy, but I would slow down on the Raptors are going to fall out of the play-in. They're cooked. This is the end of their season. They're not even going to make the playoffs anymore. I would slow down on that. I think they're still in a pretty comfortable position to maintain their playoff spot, maintain being in the top 6, and I would trust them to beat down on the competition that they have beat down on pretty much all season. Now, that said, you have to ask the question, why is this Raptors team not getting as much juice as they could potentially get by beating the rest of the good teams in the NBA? And truthfully, I think it comes down to development, They obviously haven't been able to get much from Grady Dick. He has fallen out of the rotation, basically does not play anymore. Jacoby Walter, who has been very good defensively, has been wildly inconsistent offensively, especially as a shot maker. And truthfully, his self-creation is not there yet. And of course, he's a second-year player, but ultimately, like there hasn't been any development on that front. He's very similar to what I would say he was as a rookie. Like it's very good defense, inconsistent offense, very reliant on catch and shoot jump shots, and if those aren't falling, it's kind of feast or famine. Mamu, I think, has slowed down recently and hasn't doesn't have that same impact or same punch as he did over the stretch, I would say, of like October to January. I think the reason for that is in part because well, they have to facilitate and find ways for him to win his minutes. I think he's a very context dependent player in the sense that I feel like when him and Jamal Shed were running their two-man game early on in the season, it worked a lot more. And now I think they're trying to plug in Mamu into actions on the floor at the same time as Jakob Poeltl, and there's not as much spacing for Mamu to get his game off. I do think the Yak and Mamu stuff could work, but it needs some ironing out. And yeah, I think that's it for Yak and Mamu specifically. But Jamal Shed had a really brutal game, and he's had a couple of really bad games recently. If he isn't able to be this facilitator and playmaker, boy, does the floor drop out from this team, especially with their bench. And so you lean on these starters who also have their flaws offensively, but can get the job done. And you kind of wonder if they're just going to rev up those guys' minutes more in the playoffs and have these guys play spot minutes in certain moments, in certain situations, and hope that they can kind of live with that. You know, Colin Murray-Boyles, hopefully he gets healthy and he's back in the lineup. But I think that's a valid question to have is like, how much are they going to rely on their depth? And, you know, especially if you look up and down the roster, you know, Jonathan Mobo got some minutes tonight. He is basically exactly the same player as he was last year in terms of, you know, very talented defender, but not doing much or getting much offensively from him. Jamison Battle seems to be struggling to crack a rotation spot, although truthfully, I would like for Battle to play more. I think his shooting would really help for this Raptors team. And it seems like Trace Jackson Davis is just a break in case of emergency type of big man, especially considering that they have, you know, Yak and Mamu that they want to play at 5, and of course Scotty Barnes that they want to play at the 5 as well. It's hard because I think Scotty Barnes does so much good for this Raptors team. I think he facilitates so much offense for this Raptors team. He obviously covers over so many defensive mishaps that they have that you sort of wonder, like, how much more can he squeeze out of this roster as currently constructed? I think the same thing applies to Brandon Ingram, who, you know, Sampson had a really great video about this, and he wrote about this as well, I believe, about, like, the Raptors are leaving a lot of assists on the table for Brandon Ingram, and they're just not making the shots to the passes that he's making. And I think that's absolutely true. Is he being as good of a playmaker as he potentially could be? No, but I do think the lack of shot making around him gravely hurts his decision making. And at some point, a guy with a scorer's mindset like him is just going to be like, man, these mid-range jump shots are easier and better for our offense than a Jacoby Walter catch and shoot 3 or a Jamal Shed catch and shoot 3. And, you know, Sampson and I had a little bit of a discussion on Twitter where he said, like, I don't think this is a rotation issue, and I can't lay this at the feet of Darko. I agree with that, by the way, because I don't think this is a coaching issue as much as it is a roster and talent issue. We can maybe talk about that a little bit more. But he also mentioned that he thinks the Raptors need to lean in more on their two-man actions. And I kind of responded, like, I would like for them to prioritize spacing around those two-man actions too. And I think part of that is, like, don't have Jamal Shed camped out above the break. You know, don't have RJ Barrett camped out above the break. Or when you have Jakob Poeltl and Scotty Barnes on the floor together, have them spaced out onto the same side of the floor instead of them being on opposite corners or on opposite sides of the floor. Like, different spacing techniques is what I would say that could maybe alleviate 15% of the pressure. And I'm not going to go ahead and say, like, I have technically watched every single play the Raptors have made, but it feels like there is a little bit more left on the bone that they can get to. And by the way, incorporating or reincorporating Jakob Poeltl into the fold, I think is also a big part of this equation because he's obviously a non-spacing player. He can't shoot, but he's very important to their screening ability. And how much do they lean on how important he is as a screener versus how much of a non-spacer he is, and what lineup combinations work with that? I think from that perspective, there's a little bit of coaching that can be done. Like there's probably like a 15 to 20% improvement rate that can be done just by prioritizing spacing a little bit more and finding rotations that can give you more spacing. But that being said, it is a talent issue when your bench isn't giving you enough offensive production. And I think the lack of development from their bench really hinders their ability to score and score consistently against good teams. The bar is now higher for this Raptors team. You know, we're not talking about them beating the Brooklyn Nets on any given night. We're talking about them trying to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves in a game in March, you know, where the Timberwolves are trying to win because they're going up that Western Conference standings. We're talking about how they can kind of beat and galvanize some of these Eastern Conference teams. Not galvanize, or galvanize against some of these Eastern Conference teams. Can you beat the Pistons on any given night? Can you beat the Knicks on any given night? Doesn't seem like they can. Now, we'll see how they work through this over the next 6 weeks. But as things currently stand, the Raptors kind of are who they are. And I'm very curious to see how that sorts out in the postseason for them and what kind of information we can gain from a postseason series to see who sticks and who doesn't as the Raptors head into a very, very important offseason. Folks, as always, like, comment, subscribe, do the things that you guys usually do to make sure Raptors Republic gets out to more people. Appreciate you guys. See you guys later.